There are announcements in professional baseball that arrive with the quiet inevitability of something everyone already knew was coming. Roster moves, lineup adjustments, the kind of managerial decisions that generate mild interest and are forgotten within the news cycle of a single afternoon. And then there are announcements that stop everything. That pull people away from whatever they were doing and toward the nearest screen. That send ripples through an entire organization, from the front office down to the equipment staff, because everyone understands simultaneously that what was just said changes something fundamental about how the next chapter of the season will be written. What Dave Roberts said on Thursday morning was the second kind. Shohei Ohtani was returning to the starting rotation. And nothing, not the weeks of careful speculation, not the mounting pressure from the media, not the internal conversations that had been happening behind closed doors at Dodger Stadium for longer than anyone had officially acknowledged, nothing had fully prepared the baseball world for the specific weight of hearing those words spoken out loud in Dave Roberts' measured, deliberate voice. But that was only the beginning. Because what happened in the hours that followed the announcement, on the field, in the dugout, and in the charged space between a manager and the most valuable player in the history of professional baseball, turned a story about a pitching return into something far more complicated, far more revealing, and far more human than any pre-game announcement was ever supposed to be. The context matters enormously here, because nothing that happened Thursday exists in isolation from everything that came before it. Ohtani's return to the mound had been the central, consuming question hovering over the Dodgers season since the moment the medical team first cleared him for graduated throwing programs in the early spring. The Tommy John surgery that had ended his pitching career temporarily had been discussed, analyzed, and debated with an intensity usually reserved for geopolitical events. Every bullpen session was documented. Every velocity reading was published. Every time Ohtani so much as rotated his shoulder in the general direction of a baseball, someone with a camera was there to record it and someone with an opinion was there to interpret it. Through all of it, Ohtani had remained characteristically, almost aggressively calm. He answered questions through his interpreter with the same composed brevity that has always characterized his public communication. He was progressing. He was feeling good. He would be ready when the organization decided the time was right. He trusted the process and the people managing it. The organization, for its part, had been equally measured in its public communications. President Friedman had said repeatedly that no timeline would be imposed on Ohtani's return. That the decision would be made based on medical data, performance indicators, and the collective judgment of the staff best positioned to evaluate those things. That the Dodgers were a long-season organization that understood the difference between the urgency that media cycles create and the patience that genuine championship preparation requires. And then Thursday morning arrived, and Dave Roberts walked to the podium, and said it simply and directly, the way Roberts delivers all significant information, without theater, without build-up, without the performative gravity that lesser communicators use to signal that something important is coming. Ohtani would start against the Mets. Ben Rothbett would catch. The room full of reporters absorbed the announcement for approximately 1 second. Then every hand went up at once. The pairing of Ohtani and Rothbett behind the plate was itself a story within the story. Rothbett, who had spent the better part of 3 seasons establishing himself as one of the most technically sophisticated pitch framers in the National League, had worked extensively with Ohtani during bullpen sessions throughout the rehabilitation process. Their communication, conducted through Ohtani's interpreter and the particular non-verbal language that develops between a pitcher and catcher over hundreds of hours of shared work, had developed into something that the coaching staff described privately as unusually intuitive for a pairing with so little game experience together. Roberts, when asked about the decision to go with Rothbett rather than the more experienced options on the roster, answered with the direct simplicity that defines his best press conference moments. He said Rothbett understood Ohtani's arsenal better than anyone currently available. He said the decision was about maximizing Ohtani's comfort and command in what was, regardless of how well the rehabilitation had gone, still a significant and high-stakes return. He said he trusted Rothbett completely. It was a reasonable answer. A thorough answer. The kind of answer that closes lines of questioning rather than opening new ones. But the reporters in that room had been covering this organization long enough to hear what the answer did not say. It did not say that the decision had been simple. It did not say that everyone in the building had agreed immediately. And it did not say anything at all about what had happened approximately 40 minutes before Roberts walked to the podium. The field at Dodger Stadium in the hours before a night game against the Mets carries a particular quality of controlled intensity. Batting practice runs on its precise schedule. Pitchers move through their pre-game routines with the focused efficiency of professionals who have performed these rituals thousands of times. The stadium staff works around the players with the practiced invisibility of people who understand exactly where they are and are not supposed to be. Everything operates on a rhythm that has been refined across decades of professional baseball into something that functions, at its best, like a very complicated and very beautiful clock. That rhythm broke at approximately 4:47 in the afternoon. Ohtani had been on the field for his warm-up session, the carefully structured pre-game preparation that his pitching coaches had designed specifically for this return start, calibrated to the minute with the kind of precision that reflects both the medical team's caution and Ohtani's own extraordinary attention to physical detail. The session was proceeding exactly as planned. Velocity was where it needed to be. Movement on his splitter was drawing quiet nods from the coaches positioned along the baseline. Rothbett was receiving each pitch with the focused intensity of a catcher who understood that what he was doing right now was as important as anything he would do once the game began. And then Ohtani deviated from the plan. It was a small deviation by most standards. A single additional sequence of pitches, specifically, a series of high-effort fastballs thrown at what the radar gun registered as maximum intent, beyond the ceiling that the pre-game protocol had established for this particular session. To a casual observer, it would have looked like nothing more than a pitcher finding his rhythm, pushing slightly into that territory where real feel lives. To the coaches watching, it registered as a departure from the agreed parameters. To Dave Roberts, standing at the edge of the dugout with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on the mound with the particular stillness that precedes a decision, it was something that required an immediate response. He walked onto the field. What followed lasted approximately 4 minutes and was witnessed by everyone present on the field, players, coaches, support staff, and the small group of credentialed media allowed field access during pre-game preparation. Roberts stood close to Ohtani and spoke in a low, controlled voice. His interpreter relayed the words. Ohtani listened with his characteristic stillness, his expression giving nothing away to those watching from a distance. Roberts was not shouting. He was not performing anger for an audience. He was doing something more precise and in some ways more significant than that. He was drawing a line. Clearly, directly, without ambiguity. He was saying that the protocol existed for a reason, that the reason was protecting an asset that the entire organization, and, more fundamentally, a human being, had invested an enormous amount to rebuild correctly, and that no individual impulse, however well-intentioned or athletically driven, was more important than the collective medical judgment that had gone into designing that protocol. He was saying, in the language of professional baseball, that greatness does not exempt anyone from the structure that makes greatness sustainable. Ohtani nodded once. Roberts held eye contact for a moment longer, then turned and walked back to the dugout. The warm-up session resumed exactly where the protocol said it should. By the time the game began that evening, the story of the pre-game exchange had already moved through the facility and into the first wave of media coverage with the speed that internal moments always achieve when they occur in front of enough witnesses. Reporters who had been on the field reconstructed it carefully. Former players appearing on pre-game broadcasts offered analysis that ranged from strong support for Roberts' decision to cautious suggestions that managing Ohtani required a different framework than managing ordinary players. One former Cy Young winner, speaking on a national broadcast, cut through the debate with a single observation that landed cleanly on both sides of the argument. He said that the $200 million left-handed pitcher in the opposing dugout, the one the Dodgers were preparing to face that evening, had once been reprimanded by his own manager for almost exactly the same thing in almost exactly the same circumstances. And that pitcher had gone on to have 3 of the best seasons of his career in the years that followed. Not despite that conversation. Because of it. He said that the managers who love their players enough to stop them when they need to be stopped are the rarest and most valuable people in professional baseball. More valuable, sometimes, than the players themselves. Roberts said nothing publicly about the exchange. When asked during his pre-game media availability, he said simply that preparation had gone well and that he was confident in Ohtani's readiness. He said it in the calm, direct, completely opaque tone of a man who had already said everything that needed to be said to the only person who needed to hear it. In the Dodgers dugout as first pitch approached, Ohtani sat with his characteristic stillness. Around him, the organized noise of a major league pregame settled into the focused quiet that arrives in the final minutes before the game begins. Rothbard went through his signs one final time with the pitching coach. The lineup card was finalized. The umpires exchanged their pregame formalities at home plate. Ohtani looked out at the field. Whatever had happened during warm-ups, whatever had passed between him and his manager in those 4 minutes on the mound, was behind him now. Fully and completely behind him, in the way that only certain kinds of people can leave things behind. Not suppressed. Not ignored. Processed, understood, and set aside in favor of the only thing that mattered now. The game was about to begin. And Shohei Ohtani was about to pitch.